One of the commentators that I read as I was preparing this sermon shared a story about her 4-year-old daughter. Now, her 4th grade daughter. 4th grade daughter. And the 4th grade daughter was in a class that had perfect attendance for a whole month. And they could pick a reward. They could either pick being able to bring a stuffed animal to school one day, or they could get a homework pass and be able to skip an assignment. The class chose to bring stuffed animals to school because they figured that, well, they may not need the homework pass, or even if they use the homework pass, they'd still have to learn the material anyway. And having a stuffed animal was a more sure thing. We like a sure thing, don't we? We like things that are certain and sure and predictable. We like things that have substance and strength to them. I think that's one of the reasons we're in awe of the mountains that sometimes tower over us, that have been standing for centuries. These mountains with the strength and stability that they have. We're impressed by tall buildings and skyscrapers. And we see the strength and the awe and the architecture. And we marvel at them. As Jesus' disciples were with him, they were standing near the temple. And they were in awe of this big structure. This was the second temple. The first temple Solomon built, that got destroyed. They rebuilt. They built a second temple. And then, beginning in about 20 BC to 63 AD, they did an extensive remodeling project on this temple. This temple that they're looking at was remodeled by Herod the Great, the Herod who was the king at the time Jesus was born, the Herod that the Magi came to see in Jerusalem. And by the time he got going on this temple, it had a footprint of 1,600 feet in one direction by 900 feet in another direction. The walls were 16 feet thick. The outer court could hold a gathering of up to 400,000 people. It was a massive building. And it was decorated very ornately with the best of the best of the best. And so it's no wonder that as the disciples are standing there with Jesus, they're in awe of this great building. And then Jesus tells them that there will be a day when not one of its stones will stand on another. And some of those stones weighed 100 tons, so it's hard to imagine that, it's hard to conceive that temple can ever be torn down. But yet it did happen. It was completed in 63 AD. And in the year 70, there was a Jewish revolt. And during the battle that ensued, the temple came down. The Jewish historian Josephus writes, "The roar of the flames, streaming far and wide, mingled with the groans of the fallen victims. And owing to the height of the hill and the mass of the burning pile, one would have thought that the whole city was ablaze. With the cries on the hill were blended those of the multitude in the city below. And now many who were emaciated and tongue-tied from starvation, when they beheld the sanctuary on fire, gathered strength once more for lamentations and wailing. Yet more awful than the uproar were the sufferings." As Jesus stood there with his disciples, he gave that fateful prophecy. Nations and kingdoms will fight against each other. There will be great earthquakes and wide-scale food shortages and epidemics. There will be terrifying sights and great signs in the sky. But before all this occurs, they will take you into custody and harass you because of your faith. Those were the signs that Jesus gave that would precede the falling of that great and glorious temple. And those signs indeed took place. As we hear about the starvation that was had that Josephus recorded. As we know that the followers of Jesus found themselves being arrested, being harassed, being persecuted. We too live in a world where things come crumbling down around us. Some of us remember 9/11, and we remember where we were when the first plane hit the World Trade Center, and then the second one hit, and then one hit the Pentagon, and a fourth one was taken down in a field as the passengers on that plane overpowered the hijackers. We live in a time where we have school shootings, church shootings, random violence at different events in our world. We live in a time of political violence. President Trump, while on the campaign trail, experienced an attempted assassination. Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania experienced violence against his household. 2 legislators in Minnesota were assassinated along with their spouses. And recently we've had the assassination of Charlie Kirk. We live in a world where we have not only rumors of wars, but we have wars themselves taking place. And we live in a world where we experience the ravages of wildfires, earthquakes, tornadoes, and hurricanes. And then there's the stuff that hits closer to home. Those times when our own lives experience some crumbling. The loss of a job, conflict in a friendship, the death of a loved one, a spouse, a child, a great grandchild. Death, mourning, crying, and pain. We experience many losses in this world. And it's at those times that our walls come crumbling down. And the stones begin to fall around us. And as Jesus spoke to the disciples about the stones falling around the temple, he said to them, "You will be betrayed by your parents, brothers and sisters, relatives, and friends. They will execute some of you. Everyone will hate you because of my name." Betrayal by those closest. It seems hard, it seems harsh. And yet it does happen, doesn't it? And when those closest to us betray us, that's when the pain seems to hurt the worst. And these stumbling blocks that come down can become stumbling blocks in our relationship with God. When the stones fall down around us, we can struggle with how God can let these things happen. And yet opportunities can come out of these obstacles. And the opportunity for us to experience in a different way the grace and the strength of our God. I don't know about you, but as I go through this world, I live under an illusion of self-reliance. I believe I can accomplish things. I can do things. I can, by the force of my will and by the wisdom and talent and skill that I have, make things happen. And maybe you've lived in that illusion as well. And maybe you still do. But we know the reality is that that is an illusion, isn't it? This self-reliance, this stand on our own 2 feet, this pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality isn't completely accurate. And for Jesus' disciples, they definitely experienced that was not accurate. As they were harassed, persecuted, arrested, and imprisoned. And yet, as Jesus warns them about this, he tells them these words. He said, "This will provide you with an opportunity to testify. Make up your minds not to prepare your defense in advance. I'll give you words and wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to counter or contradict. That is curious advice, right? Don't prepare your defense in advance. That would be malpractice if an attorney did that, right? Because we know if you fail to prepare, you prepare to fail. But Jesus doesn't say they'll fail, does he? He says, don't prepare because I'll give you words and wisdom. In those times, they were called to rely on Jesus. When their world was shattered, when things were shaky, when the walls were coming down, Jesus says, I've got you. I'm in this with you, and I will give you what you need. Another person we bump into in the Scriptures is the Apostle Paul, and he's notorious because he started out his career as one who was trying to get rid of those Christians, those followers of the way as they were known. And he was breathing out murderous threats to them when Jesus confronted him in a blinding vision on the road. And from that moment on, Paul became a follower of Jesus. He was a missionary who planted many churches. He wrote many of the letters that make up our New Testament. And yet life is a struggle for Paul. He had this thorn in the flesh, as he calls it. There's been lots of ink spilled on what it may or may not have been. But we do know this, that he cried out to God repeatedly to take it away. Take this thorn in my flesh away from me. But as he records in 2 Corinthians 12, he says, God said to me, my grace is enough for you, because power is made perfect in weakness. So I'll gladly spend my time bragging about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power can rest on me. Therefore, I'm all right with weaknesses, insults, disasters, harassments, and stressful situations for the sake of Christ. Because when I'm weak, then I'm strong. When the stones fall down around us, we have opportunities. We have opportunities to share the goodness of God, to testify, to share what God has done in our lives. I want you to think about a time when it seemed like the world was just crumbling down around you. Where was God in that? Where was God in that for you? How did God provide you comfort? How did God provide you healing? How did God provide you strength? How did God work something good out of that situation? And the answers to those questions are your testimony. It's a way to testify, to witness, to share. It's a story that you can put in your hip pocket to maybe provide some encouragement and some hope for somebody else. The obstacles that God guided you through have provided an opportunity for you to share and provide strength and hope for somebody else. I think I've talked about my friend Todd before. I've known Todd about 6-7 years. When I met him, he was the author of a blog titled A Satanist Reads the Bible. And Todd and I have had many conversations, and right now he is getting a Master's of Divinity through Boston University's Divinity School right now. He's getting closer to Jesus. Not quite there, but we're getting really close. As he and I chatted on Friday, he shared about this last summer. His mom has some health issues. Dad had a hospitalization and surgery, and so he traveled from Rhode Island back to Denver to be there for his parents. And he knew he would need some things to do, some things that were helpful for him to be able to maintain his hope and his strength. And he took some math books. Todd's a little different kind of guy. Doing math problems is something he geeks out on. He just loves doing it. And he said, during that time, he came to some observations about God. And he said, you know, if you take odd numbers starting at 1, and you take 4 of them, you add up the sum of those numbers, 1, 3, 5, and 7, you get 16. And 4 squared is 16. He said this works for any string of odd numbers as long as you start at 1. However many there are, they'll add up to the number that is the square of that number. And he said, you know, see, God is a God of order. God is a God that gives us something concrete. You know, I can have 1 apple, I can have 2 oranges, and you can grab onto those things, right? And God gives us some tangible things to grab onto in this world, as we have the gift of His Word, as we have the gifts of baptism and communion. Concrete things that point us to the reality of God. And yet the math world also has these irrational numbers. Pi, 3.14159, yada, 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 ad infinitum. Right? To infinity and beyond for that number. And he said there's another one that's E. Maybe you engineering guys have bumped into that. It's 2.7, yada, 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 to infinity and beyond. These irrational numbers. And he said for that, it's a reminder that God is beyond. He is so far beyond us because, you know, given an infinite amount of time, we would still never get to the end of the numbers because numbers they go in infinite number. And we have this God who is immanent, who is with us here, and who is transcendent. And that's how God worked through math of all things. To give my friend Todd some hope and some anchoring as he cares for parents who are aging and who have some health challenges. That's his story. Maybe your stories aren't that quirky. But that's his story. And I know you guys have stories, and I have stories. We all have stories. When the world starts crumbling down around us, it can be an obstacle, it can be a stumbling block. But it can also be an opportunity. An opportunity for another story. An opportunity to lean into Jesus and to lean into His goodness and His grace. The chapter before what we're looking at today, we're in Luke 21, and in Luke 20, Jesus tells an interesting story about a man who owned a vineyard. And he rented out this vineyard. And so he sent one of his servants to the vineyard to get his rent. And the tenants beat him and sent him away empty-handed. Well, he sent a second servant. And again, that servant was beaten and sent away empty-handed. He sent a third servant. And this one was beaten even worse and sent away empty-handed. And then the owner of that vineyard got rid of those tenants, literally, and burned the vineyard down. As Jesus is explaining that story, he shares these words in Luke 20. Jesus said, "Then what is the meaning of this text of Scripture? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Everyone who falls on that stone will be crushed, and the stone will crush the person it falls on." Those tenants rejected 3 servants, and ultimately they killed the son who was sent. And the religious establishment of Jesus' time knew that that story was targeted at them. And so he tells them that they will be crushed by that stone. And this is another reminder that as God's people, life is not always what we want it to be in this world. We have struggles, we have heartaches, we have losses. And Jesus promised his disciples that they would be persecuted because of his name. And as those who are baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we too wear that name. And we too can expect a rather bumpy ride in this world. And we can expect to be treated the way Jesus was treated. And the way Jesus' disciples, the apostles, were treated. and the way followers of Jesus have been treated throughout the centuries. But yet Jesus makes a promise. He promises that not a hair on their head will be harmed. For some of you guys out there, I don't know what that says about the walk of the Lord. Because you don't have much hair left, if any. But I don't think that's what Jesus is really getting to. I think he's saying that he's with us. He's got this. And he will strengthen us. We live in a world where people don't always embrace Jesus. Don't always embrace all of Jesus. And I don't know that any of us always embraces all of Jesus. Because Jesus promises to bring changes. Changes to our lives. And there's sometimes we think, no, I like the mess that I'm living in. I like these bad habits that I have. They give me joy. But Jesus promises to love us for who we are. And he loves us enough not to leave us where we are. And the transformative power of Jesus in our lives sometimes is a bit uncomfortable. And I think it's uncomfortable also for people who don't want what Jesus is offering. And so they come up with things like saying, oh, it's just a myth, which it isn't. It's historically attestable. Or they make statements like, well, I gave up talking to imaginary friends a long time ago. And then we point to the reality of that now. We have a God who is both finite, like the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and also infinite, like numbers like pi. And he is a God who promises to always be with us. And I find comfort in these words from 1 Corinthians 1. The message of the cross is foolishness to those who are being destroyed, but it is the power of God for those who are being saved. When the stones fall around us, we get to lean into Jesus. And because of the Jesus, the end is only a new beginning. Amen. A few questions for you to think on. When have you had the stones fall down around you? What are some of those times in your life when life has been just, whoa, how am I going to get through this, right? How did God get you through that time? What's the story that comes out of that time? And who can you share that story with? Food for thought.